Right, welcome to this roundtable on building information modelling, sometimes known as BIM. I'm Richard Waterhouse, I'm Chief Executive of RIB Enterprises. I'm particularly interested in the benefits that the industry will receive from BIM, and in particular that middle word, information, which is something that RIB Enterprises and in particular MBS provide to the industry. And I'll be chairing the debate. Anne.
Hello, I'm Anne King. I'm the Membership Marketing Director at BISRIA, and that means I've been involved with the mechanical electrical sector for a very long time. And I think my main interest in BIM in that respect is just making sure that the M&E sector really gets its fair share and benefits from it. I'm also a director at Building Smart, so the whole context of interoperability is something that is important and of course supports that view on making sure that all sectors benefit.
Okay, I'm Nigel Clark. I'm Technical Director with Hilson Rand. We're services consultants. Obviously we see this as a major step change for us and for the industry, and we're, I guess, part of the way through the process of implementing it across the company, and that's one of my challenges over the next few years.
My name is Sam Collard, Lang O'Rourke. I work in construction north of our business, and we are trying to apply BIM and its techniques onto our projects. We see ourselves as the integrators of the process. Designers produce the models, supply chain will produce the models. We look to get consistent outputs from the BIM model to realise the benefits and the efficiencies that you can achieve.
Hi, I'm Robert Klashka. I run Studio Klashka. We're a small, fairly techie architecture practice, about 10 years old now. Every project that we've done since inception has actually been using BIM software, largely because we decided early days that we would see whether it worked, because we're sort of young and hungry, and it's worked fairly well for us. But at the moment I would describe myself as fairly frustrated by the offerings that there are floating around on the market.
I'm Alistair Kell from BDP. I'm the Director of Information Technology at BDP, but I'm also an architect. I'm very keen to ensure that the practice can get best value out of BIM and to see how that can be delivered meaningfully on live projects.
Hi, my name's Stephen Hamill, and I'm Head of BIM at MBS. And I'm part of the team at MBS that are moving master specification systems from being words on paper to being actually detailed objects that define the detailed properties of the objects, the standards and regulations they should comply to, workmanship and execution, and then FM, information how those objects should be managed throughout the life cycle of the building.
Hi, I'm Paul Morell. I am a quantity surveyor by background and training. But my principal interest now, I'm Government's Chief Construction Advisor, and therefore my interest in BIM is its potential to produce benefit to clients rather than to the industry, of course. And particularly, I guess, out of the cultural change that BIM will both enable and virtually demand. I don't think it's fundamentally about software, it's about process and change.
Fantastic, thank you very much everybody. I think the first question that we have to ask ourselves is, what exactly is BIM? What do we mean by BIM to those in the industry who potentially don't understand what this is? Alistair, what does it mean for you?
Well, at the moment, what it means for us is to be able to work multidisciplinary to ensure that we have meaningful and successful coordination between disciplines. We are looking to apply it to projects, certainly up to the conclusion of a scheme design, and to ensure that the different disciplines' design outputs are coordinated and managed up to that point. We then break out in different disciplines working with it in different ways past that point, but we are seeing significant benefit in moving it through into detailed design and to produce production information. Equally working with clients, contractor clients largely, who are aware of the benefit. It can bring a great deal more efficiency to scheduling costing and quantifying. I think that the next step past that is to look at how it can be used to deliver actually on live construction sites, rather than simply a kind of paper or electronic exercise to reach the point of arriving to site. And certainly we are working with a number of contractors to have that achieved.
Sam, what is BIM for you?
BIM for me is it's an integrated database. I think there is a perception that BIM is design. I don't quite follow that. I think we talk about building information modelling. To me, that excludes infrastructure from it. I think what we need to realise is that BIM processes and software are things which underpin what we're trying to achieve. We're probably in a state of flux where we're mostly in a 3D plus world and we're not attributing information. People are nervous about how you attribute information into the model. To me, we need to start driving through controls that you would have over anything, which is governance, sort the protocols out. And to BIM, to me, is going to be standardization of a product, understanding what the model is. I don't think we've actually defined what a BIM model is in the contract and what it means to people, what level of delivery that they will bring to that. And I think if we start to demystify that process, then we will actually be able to identify what BIM is, define it as a KPI, and measure an output against that. And ultimately, I think we'll be in a position where we can put a scorecard against BIM, so that people will need to reach a certain standard in order to classify what a BIM model is. But I think BIM is a process of accessing information for all, from the client through to the designer, through to the tradesperson on site.
Paul, in terms of the government and the client perspective, what is BIM for the client?
Well, all of the aforementioned. I think at the highest level is just the intelligent use of digital information. But as you work your way down through a series of successions, there are some of the madnesses in the way that we currently work, that we work off different platforms. You know, we don't all work. That's the first simplest thing. Let's all work off the same data. That shouldn't be controversial. The power of virtual modelling has always struck me as insane, that we find it so difficult to make a 3D computer model. We go and do it out there at one-to-one on the wind of the rain as an experiment instead, leading to a massive amount of waste. So, you know, let's build the model. It's almost literally true that I retired from my day job because I didn't want to sit through one more meeting in which we argued of why a duct and a column wanted to be in the same place. And I think we have not even begun to understand the cost of that carried across the whole of construction. Fundamentally, the power to load objects, you know, in the model with any information that you choose, I think that will unleash a massive amount of innovation in the industry. And I've already seen, you know, stuff about people movement going way beyond, you know, the initial business of how much carbon there is in a product, how much cost there might be in a product. And the biggest interest to government actually is in the silent M in BIM, which is building information modelling and management. Government hardly knows what it owns at the moment, let alone how to maintain it. And the idea of getting a file that is fully loaded with information about how you take care of that building is actually a much bigger pull for government. It isn't in a hurry to build an awful lot more goods at the moment. How you manage the existing estate and protect it. And that second aim is actually currently the big pull inside government, rather than sorting the industry out. But fundamentally, as I said, about culture. You know, you can choose your own percentages, but it's probably 10 or 20% about technology, and the rest is about cultural change.
Robert, you're in a smaller practice, and yet you can see BIM and you keep investing in BIM. And why is that for you in a smaller practice?
I'm reluctant to say that you start down a path and so you keep walking down that path, but I'm sure there's an aspect of that. I would guess that for us, because we don't have the sort of in a sense, the risk barriers that the bigger players around the table have, that allows us to make decisions very quickly, kill things that don't work. Certainly from a software perspective, we're pretty ruthless about what we do and don't use in the products that we use. And if something doesn't work, we don't use it. We'll talk about it. But when you get to actually working with it. Our approach tends to be more a common sense approach because we don't work inside sort of big frameworks. I mean, I've just started working for a PCT, and it's interesting you say management. I was talking to them about getting some of the information, even if it's just spreadsheet information, out of our models. And the FM there said, God, that sounds really interesting. I talked to a guy 6 months ago from Police Estates, who I think from Interserve, and he said, what you're saying all sounds really interesting, but I don't see how we could possibly, I'd like to be doing this, but everything's set up the wrong way. But what I'll tend to do, because at the moment, 100% of our work has come through contractors, and that's the reason that we're busy in the recession. Haven't always been, but we're very busy at the moment. It's because when somebody asks me to do something, in many ways, I'll sort of start off by asking myself, what else can I do for free? I'll give you a really simple example of that. We've just done a cladding model for, and in fact it was a visualisation cladding model for Championship football grounds, part of a 6-phase extension to it. And we'd modelled it, so I could give them areas of claddings. Well, why not? Yeah. And whilst I was effectively I wasn't using BIM software to do that. I was using a basic 3D CAD package in that instance. The information was still there. I mean, it's something that I put to some of the guys at the beginning of this meeting, is that, in a sense, rather than trying to define BIM, I think if we all could put our aspirations down on paper as to what BIM should be, and then use that to measure all the software packages, even if I'm feeling a little bit mischievous, even packages like SketchUp, measure each of the software packages, including AutoCAD, Revit, Bentley Architecture, MicroStation, ArchiCAD, all of them. I think that you would find that the regular CAD packages, the old-fashioned, even 2D workflows, actually provide most of the things and are probably easier to use than a lot of them. And I think that simply is an indication that the software's a bit rubbish at the moment. I've got some opinions about why that is. I think it's appropriate. Largely, the connection between the software development industry and professional practice. I'm not so sure about contracting, but to some extent you've got an easier bag to deal with, because to some extent you're sort of dealing with not less and less finished designs, but most of the connection with the software industry has been through CAD managers, and CAD managers historically have been responsible for getting drawings out quickly. And so it's no surprise that the packages that we've got are really glorified drafting packages with stuff bolted on the edges. And when you bolt the stuff around the edges, it doesn't tend to work very well, which is the state of play.
Thank you for that.
Sorry.
No, not a problem. But is BIM about technology, Ali? Is
No,
that
not at all.
important?
No, I'm very much along with Paul on this in terms of percentages. I might go even more extreme. I was involved 4 or 5 years ago, whenever it was, with the Avanti programme. And the point about that was actually seeing what culture changes are needed to really drive, well, frankly, be any change, but particularly one that involves not only the interdisciplinary, along with you there, Alistair, but also the supply chain. Because we're looking at going across the matrix and down the columns. I mean, it's quite a big way to go, all in one go, and I think we've got to do it little steps at a time. No, I don't think it's about technology at all, really. I think it can hold us back. I wouldn't dispute that. But I think the problem is we've got to work on it from the culture side. And that, in our industry, has never been very easy in any of the changes we've tried to make. But that's what it's about. It's about being prepared to trust, take on board other things, and perhaps, too, understanding more where the drivers are going to come from. I love your stories about the clients in police and PCTs and everything, because although I don't think it's a responsibility of the customer to drive things, sorry folks, we're the industry, we're selling to them, it's our responsibility to sell them what they want. We have to listen to them. And my holy grail for BIM, when I'm defining it, is certainly down at the facilities end. But I think we've got an awful lot of steps to get there before they'll really be able to benefit at all. And when you're going up an exponential curve of benefit, we've all got to invest quite a lot. Other big problem with this sector is we only invest when we can see payback on projects. We are not like the airframe industry, say, which will look at the payback, or the retail industry, which looks payback across what it's used to, a large quantity of overheads. We think in terms of projects, and we've got to somehow get people seeing it in projects.
I tell you what, I invest. I sit at my desk at the weekend, obviously in a small practice context, but I sit down at the weekend and think about and improve our systems. That, and we invest with money as well. I would imagine, technology-wise, for a small practice, we probably our IT spend is 3 or 4 times what your average. And when you look at the amount of time that we spend training people, and also the demographic of our staff, typically we only hire professional people. It's I don't know. I think I invest, not on the scale that.
And I suspect you reap the rewards as well, which we need to shout about really loud, because there aren't many occasions, I think, in the BIM development and investment that people haven't reaped some rewards. And yet it's a big step to do it.
I did want to pick you up on you said it's not about technology. It's a very strong idea that it's about people, not technology. It's about people and technology. And the problem with certainly architects is that if you give them an out, like saying, oh, it's not about technology, then immediately everybody goes, oh, it's not about technology, we can carry on doing what we're doing anyway. So I fundamentally disagree with that. It's about technology and culture, and and if we don't have the technology, then the culture's pointless.
But the technology, it's only recently reached a point that it makes it all deliverable. I think the ideas have been around for such a long time, and there have been various iterations of software over a number of years, but it really only is in the last 2-3 years that the software and the hardware have begun to reach expectations. But again, you talk about investment and 5 individuals versus 1,000 in our company, and the potential to try to invest at a practice-wide level for ourselves, particularly at the moment in the recession, it's just not there. It's just not there, because the need to be able to demonstrate the benefit means that you need to actually have it implemented and have it tested over not a single project but a number of projects with a number of teams, working across not simply one platform but in a multidisciplinary team across a number of different professions. And whilst we are there and we are pushing forward, it's a greater ask, particularly when the potential for new building work, particularly new government building work, is drying up, and fees are increasingly being pushed down and down. So yes, you look for ways to to improve efficiency. You look for ways to reduce risk, but that has to be balanced against the initial cost of that investment, and ensuring that you're going to deliver value for money. And anecdotally, everybody says yes, you will, and yes, you can. And a practice of 5 people, it's much easier to demonstrate that. But it's a bigger leap of faith.
And also much less risky to ignore it sometimes.
Well, that's really interesting, because I think there's a perception that BIM is about large organisations. It's large organisations that will benefit, and you seem to be saying something completely different.
Well, no, I'm not, and I'm not for one moment suggesting that I don't believe. I fundamentally believe that we will see benefit from it, but there are a number of factors surrounding that which make it slightly more difficult. The software as a whole, I believe, is not as robust as 2D drafting packages. So there's an inherent risk there. The scale of project is also, we carried out a number of exercises that said one particular package, we really wouldn't consider working on anything more than a 25 to 30 million pound project, generally middling sized school, whereas other packages can deal with much more significant projects. The problem is that where do you invest, because one package has benefits over another. Equally, in terms of staffing, it's quite clear that the younger staff members are more easily able to adopt and far more enthusiastic about adopting the software, but that's the software for software's sake, not necessarily the process and the rigour that needs to go behind designing buildings. So they can draw quite happily, but you need to ensure that you've got an appropriate balance within a team to make sure that the coordination aspects are ongoing, and it's not simply throwing it into a clash detection model and seeing what you get out, but understanding what you're looking at in a construction sense rather than simply a software.
Okay. Sorry, Steve.
I think the question about technology is it's not just about one thing over the other. It's about a combination of technology, the quality of the data, and the processes. So you've got to have intuitive, user-friendly software, but I think that comes as a no-brainer. I think that the key thing is the process and the data that goes into the model. So if you can imagine at the contract stage, you've got 100 windows and you know exactly where those windows are, you're going to leave that decision to the contractor, but they will adhere to the following standards. Then that template data has got to continue through until you get the as-built. These 100 windows were from manufacturer A, and then that data has got to continue through the management of the building. So 10 years later, when those windows are replaced in the manufacturer B windows, that data has got to get pumped back into that model. The processes have got to be correct, the data has got to be incredibly strong, and the software has got to be user-friendly. That goes throughout that process.
Okay. We've talked about investment and the differences there for smaller and larger organisations. But where do we start, Nigel? Where do we start if we want to do BIM?
I think most people have probably been operating in a 3D platform for some time, certainly on bigger projects, and some people have been doing it almost universally. I think for the majority of people, certainly in the UK, they're only just really starting to make the progression towards what we're describing as BIM, which is the added information into it. And I think that's actually what most people are wrestling with at the moment. And I think there's a real danger that lots of different consultants are all on their own individual paths, doing what they think is right, but there's actually not much cohesive effort into going to defining what information is actually useful in a model. And the point about the FM manager, what he wants to get out of it at the end of the day, is a crucial factor in that. And some, I think some contracts will always struggle with the order that things are going to happen in. But I think fundamentally to get a process, and let's face it, we are talking about a process here, which requires a lot of cultural change. And I think for bigger practices, that's probably one of the most difficult things to deal with, the cultural change. I think probably cultural change in a smaller practice arguably might be easier to deal with. I think the technology needs to go in parallel with it. And the investment, I think, is something that is an inevitability. As a bigger practice, we're making that investment. It's probably perhaps a harder thing to do for some small practices, but nevertheless, we've all got to do those three things, perhaps in different proportions, all of the time.
So what are the cultural changes that we face in adopting building information modelling?
I think it's a different way of working. Gone are the days where you've got an engineer doing engineering, and he does a markup and it goes to a CAD operator and they draft it with a certain amount of engineering intellect as well, perhaps to go into it. That's now different. And even in our office now, you walk into an area that there used to be the CAD department, and you've now got an engineer and a CAD operator sitting next to each other almost all of the time. And the CAD operator is not a CAD operator that they were 3 or 4 years ago. They're what I wouldn't call an engineering technician. They've got a higher level of understanding about what they're doing. They're not just a CAD operator anymore, and that doesn't sound, don't mean to sound derogatory to CAD operators, but there's a much closer interface now between engineering intellect and CAD and drafting intellect. And I say, you walk around our office and you'll find two people sitting in pairs almost now, working on screen. Engineering's still quite difficult to do on screen. I think perhaps architecture and structure is easier to work in that way because of what you're dealing with. Engineering, because there's so many different disciplines involved that you're trying to coordinate at the same time, it's still tougher to do it throughout the whole process on screen. But we're getting there.
Just how I think this could work. I think the idea of kind of a massive sort of culture fest, at which we all learn how to behave differently, is not the way it will happen. It never has before, and it won't this time around. Generally, I think perhaps the difference that I've taken inside government from previous initiatives is I don't think you can reach into the industry and fix it. I'm not going to tell the industry you must make stuff off-site. What I want to do is the government to ask a question that gets a more intelligent answer. So you should always be able to do it off-site. You should never be obliged to do it off-site to the greatest possible extent. So I'm trying to change the nature of the question. The one change is BIM. It's the one place where I was trying to reach in, partly because I've got a very clear idea of what we need at the end to manage the asset, but also because I think we might be near one of those famous cliche tipping points where people see that this is the way it's going to go, but want some confidence that there's a big enough client base that has a clear enough idea of what it thinks it wants to start responding to. So what we're trying to do is to define what we want as output in a 5-year program to say you've got to be able to do that at the end of 1 year, and by the end of the 5 years, fully collaborative 3D BIM for virtually everything. And I think having done that, and also, by the way, working with big players in the private sector, so the big retailers, the big developers and so on, so that they're consistent with what they want, then you define this is what we want from the industry. And I saw a thing, I think, in BD last week. I didn't believe everything I read in BD, but in which the president of the RIBA said, we must win this race. If you think this is a race between institutions, you're in the wrong sport, I would say. Who will win? If there is a race, it's going to be between businesses. It's going to be between businesses that look at their business model and think, how do I respond to this? And so my expectation is that that's how it will work, that people will find new ways of collaborating. Some people will choose to integrate vertically, to a degree your business has. And there are powerful commercial arguments for doing that, because the more efficient BIM gets, the more you'll be saving money where it's spent, which is not at tier 1. Of course, it's down, and so there's an argument for doing more self-performing rather than just making the industry below you more efficient and just passing it on to the client. So I think there will be actually massive structural change, not tomorrow, but over 5 or 10 years it will look very different. And then the industry will divide into integrated offers and those who respond to clients who want a far more selective sort of patronage way of assembling their offer. But it won't be any cultural change. The cultural change will follow a commercial pool.
But you have a 5-year vision for change.
Yes.
The government is acting as a benefactor to the industry here, in that it's looking it's looking to see how the government can help the industry to evolve.
No.
No?
No. I think that'd be great. That would be a wonderful way of spending my day. But, although you say public sector construction is dried up, it's only dried up to the tune of being between 35 and 40 billion. It's quite an important client.
Yes.
And so the idea, and yet it shouldn't be that much now. Everybody knows that we're spending too much on construction. And not, by the way, because of inefficiencies in the industry, but often because we don't ask for the right thing. So the desire is, a very simple one, which is to produce better value for the taxpayer. That's my job, not to help the industry. But they go hand in hand, and so government has 2 relationships with industry. It has, and I work in the 2 departments that have those relationships. Cabinet Office is the industry's client, and BIS is the industry's sponsor. So 2 ministers, Francis Morgan, Mark Prisk and Vince Cable, but they're working very closely together because they see those things as being the same. That what is good for the industry will be good for its clients and vice versa. But the prime driver is, please, better value for the taxpayer.